This video was made possible by CuriosityStream. Watch an exclusive behind-the-scenes video finally answering the question of how we make these videos by signing up for the CuriosityStream Nebula Bundle deal at curiositystream.com/Wendover. In the early morning hours of August 22nd, 2021, the Maersk Essex pulled away from berth 402 at the port of Los Angeles, California. After navigating through the breakwater, the ship made a westward turn, beginning a 2-month, 17,000-mile, 27,000-kilometer voyage from America to Asia and back. This is, in the context of today's ocean shipping industry, a rather unremarkable journey on a rather unremarkable ship. Just 15 years ago, though, the Maersk Essex would have been truly extraordinary. You see, the Essex boasts a capacity for 13,092 20-foot containers, or TEU, 20-foot equivalent units. In 2006, the Zin Los Angeles entered service with a capacity for 9,600 TEU. This was heralded with proclamations of a new era for shipping, as the Zin ranked as the single largest container ship sailing the oceans. In summer 2021, though, the Ever Ace took its maiden journey from Asia to Western Europe with a capacity for 23,992 TEU, 2.5 times more than the largest ship of a decade and a half ago. As a point of comparison, that means this one ship could carry every single container the 100,000-person nation of St. Vincent and the Grenadines received in 2020 at once, and then add Bermuda's annual container traffic on top of that. Now, this trend towards larger and larger ships is indicative of another major trend in the shipping industry: consolidation. Recognizing the incredible economies of scale in an industry founded on the principles of economies of scale, the largest container shipping lines recently worked to reap a cost advantage that their smaller competitors could not by aggregating a larger quantity of containers onto fewer ships. This is both a cause and effect of the fact that in 2000, the top 10 shipping lines controlled 51% of the global market, but now they hold 85%. Bolstered by historically low shipbuilding costs, Maersk, MSC, Evergreen, and others elected to order these new behemoth ships rather than buy or renovate used ships to operate on their busy Asia to Europe and Asia to Western North America routes. So a 13,000 TEU behemoth like the Essex, a record breaker in the wrong year, is now but a rather unremarkable workhorse of a ship fixed on a regular route from Los Angeles. After an uneventful 10 days traversing the Pacific, the Maersk Essex stopped at its first port of call, Yokohama, Japan. The stop lasted 8 hours as cranes unloaded containers from the Americas, then loaded more bound both east and westward. Soon enough, though, the Essex pulled in its lines, thrusted away from the dock, and carefully navigated its way out of Tokyo Bay. Once it reached open water, however, it actually slowed down slightly, for rather strategic reasons. You see, in 2008, in the early days of the financial crisis, shipping lines faced a perfect storm of circumstance. Shipping demand was rock bottom, and fuel costs were sky high. The lines had to innovate to survive, and so a working group at Maersk came up with a stunningly simple proposition: just go slower. You see, like most vehicles, ships are more efficient at slower speeds, but companies were always worried that operating a ship over a long distance below its designed cruising speed could damage its engine, a quick way to squander any fuel savings. Maersk proved this belief false, though, and so began operating many ships at 14 to 18 knots rather than 22. This proved financially advantageous. Most industry players observed 10 to 25% fuel savings on a given journey, and in time, going slower became standard practice industry-wide. Of course, when the shipping market's hot, lines will operate at higher speeds since they'd rather get cargo to its destination and pick up more containers sooner, but when it's not, it's a simple way to simultaneously reduce operating costs and remove capacity from the system when it's not needed. This is exactly what the Maersk Essex did after leaving Yokohama. With no need to get to its next destination quickly, it reduced speed all the way down to 12 knots as it meandered through the East China Sea, which doesn't seem like it'd be a notable practice, but slow steaming has been one of the most significant industry innovations of the 21st century. Given the slow pace, it took 5 days for the Essex to arrive at the port of Xiamen, China, where it sat for some 36 hours as thousands of containers were unloaded. In the afternoon of September 8th, though, it pushed off once again, ready to venture deeper into the Far East. On this stretch of the journey, through the South China Sea, the vessel passed closest to the country that most of its crew members call home, the Philippines. You see, with few labor laws regulating who can work on ships sailing in international waters, it's only natural that cost-conscious shipping lines look for staff from the lowest cost of living countries. In short, they look for those that they can pay least. Arising from a mix of culture, tradition, and education, the Philippines has established itself as the single largest source of maritime labor in the world. Some 77% of ratings, unlicensed, low-paid junior mariners that assist with some of the most physically demanding tasks, are from the Philippines. Overall, the industry, unperturbed by national boundaries, is incredibly international. A Danish-owned ship will be built in South Korea, registered in Panama, captained by an American, and crewed by mariners from the Philippines, India, Bulgaria, Russia, and beyond. The westernmost point of the Maersk Essex journey was here, the port of Vung Tau, Vietnam. It tied up to its dock on September 10th. These brief port visits offer most crew members some rare moments of continuous free time. As the cranes handle the work of loading and unloading the ship, the crew is typically allowed to leave the ship, see the sights, experience some nightlife, so long as they're back on board in time. However, because of the border restrictions imposed by many countries in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, this practice of brief shore visits to foreign countries has become impractical or impossible, further toughening an already difficult style of life. So, after its 44 hours physically, but not practically in Vietnam, the Essex started spinning its propeller once again on September 12th, and the crew members went back to an endless routine on an endless ocean. Now, some of Vietnam's primary exports include shoes, clothing, and textiles. These are, typically, not very price-dense products. For example, a box of cheap shoes takes up a good amount of space, but might only sell for $20 in the US. However, the fact that a company can manufacture shoes in Vietnam, ship them across the world to the US, and still turn a profit on a $20 sale price is indicative of just how unbelievably inexpensive ocean shipping is on a human level. Before the tumult that COVID brought to the industry, shipping lines typically charged about $1,000 to carry a 20-foot container from Asia to the US. That 20-foot container could hold some 3,500 shoeboxes, meaning the cost to transport a shoebox 8,000 miles or 13,000 kilometers across the world from a port in Vietnam to one in California was about 30 cents. When people talk about ocean shipping enabling globalization, this is what they mean. The fact that transporting a shoebox quite literally to the other side of the world costs less than a single McDonald's chicken nugget means that location and distance are hardly factors in today's world of manufacturing. The Maersk Essex's next stop was Hong Kong, where it docked at the Kwai Tsing container terminal for 32 hours between September 15th and 16th. It then took a slow, meandering path around the territory, dropped anchor for 24 hours, then worked its way into the port of Yantian, located near the factories of Shenzhen. Now, with its capacity for 13,092 containers, there are, of course, 13,092 different spots where a container could go on the Maersk Essex. Naturally, in practice, it's far from random. Complex, expensive computer programs crunch a huge variety of factors to spin out the ideal storage plan for a given journey. To start with, there's the obvious stuff. You want, in this journey's case, the containers for Yokohama to be placed on top of those for Xiamen, so one doesn't have to unload Xiamen containers to get to the Yokohama ones when there. Then, the program needs to be sure that certain containers are in particular positions. Refrigerated containers need to be in a spot with a power supply, while those carrying goods with the potential for leakage, like animal hides, need to be placed in a spot where they can be easily accessed by the crew while underway. Meanwhile, other containers must not be in particular spots. This table displays the regulations for the storage of hazardous materials. It indicates that items that are dangerous when wet, for example, must be stored at least 6 meters away from radioactive substances, while corrosive materials must be stored in a completely different compartment of the ship from infectious substances. On top of these and a multitude of additional factors, the ship has to be roughly balanced, meaning overall, the storage plan is a massive game of 40 Tetris that only a computer can perfect. After 52 hours of implementing that plan, the Essex made a quick overnight journey up the coast to arrive back in Xiamen, where it made its longest stop yet. 56 hours, loading a final batch of containers. This was also the last chance for the ship to load up on food and fuel before what would be by far the longest leg of its journey. Finally, just before 6 a.m. on September 24th, loading was complete and it was time to shuttle another payload of thousands of containers to North America. The Maersk Essex passed Taiwan, worked its way through the East China Sea, then threaded the gap between South Korea and Japan. After hugging the country's coast, it sailed through the busy bottleneck of the Tsugaru Strait and entered the cool open waters of the northern Pacific. The Essex entered American waters for the first time as it sailed near the Alaskan Aleutian Islands, but then exited the country's exclusive economic zone as its track started to trend south. After nearly 2 weeks on the move, the ship's path started to parallel the California coast until the Essex passed the state's Channel Islands and turned east. On October 6th, it slowed to a stop, dropped anchor, and then just sat. On October 7th, it did the same. Nothing more happened on October 8th, 9th, 10th. In fact, for the next 17 days, a longer stretch than its trans-Pacific journey, the Maersk Essex sat on anchor within sight of California's largest city, waiting for an open berth. The time finally came on October 23rd. After 62 days, the Maersk Essex arrived right back where it started. Berth 402 at the Port of Los Angeles. Now, the Port of Los Angeles is located right next to the Port of Long Beach, and while the facilities are technically independent from each other, they take advantage of shared infrastructure like roads and railways. Combined, the complex handles about 40% of all container cargo coming into the country. This is because, like most of the industry, ports benefit hugely from economies of scale. You see, for imports coming from Asia, it rarely makes sense to send ships to the East Coast, despite that being the side of the country where the majority of the population lives. That's because that would require routing through the Panama Canal, whose largest set of locks can only accommodate ships up to 14,000 TEU, smaller than many new container ships, and even then, transit fees are well into the hundreds of thousands, getting a slot can be difficult, and routing via the canal extends journey times significantly. That's why most Asian imports are offloaded on the West Coast, but the US really only has 5 major deepwater container ports on the Pacific: Long Beach, Los Angeles, Oakland, Tacoma, and Seattle. Located in by far the largest metro area on the coast, the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles have naturally evolved into the busiest as they have the greatest access to labor, transport, and infrastructure. These 3 factors are the most important for ports because, after all, nobody's shipping things to the Port of Los Angeles, they're shipping things through the Port of Los Angeles. It's all about getting cargo containers from the ship and onto onward transportation as quickly and efficiently as possible. Now, the port itself is essentially the landlord to a number of private companies that actually run each container terminal. For example, this facility is run by Houston Terminals, this one by Everport Terminal Services, this one by Phoenix Marine Services, and this one, where the Maersk Essex started and finished its journey, by APM Terminals. Now, once the Essex was docked, the first step was to physically remove containers from the ship, which was accomplished with these massive cranes. Each typically unloads 30 to 40 containers per hour onto trucks that move the containers to a temporary storage location somewhere in the terminal. Then, there are 3 possible onward transportation methods. First, they could be loaded on a smaller ship or barge that moves the containers to a smaller nearby port, although this is rare in Los Angeles compared to a place like the Pearl River Delta, where there are plenty more water-access population centers and industrial areas. Second, they could be loaded onto freight trains. This direct access to railways, the cheapest method of land-based transportation, is, in fact, a major advantage of the Port of Los Angeles. By far, the most common method of onward transportation from the Port of Los Angeles is, however, trucks. They enter through the terminal's gates, hitch up to a waiting container, then drive it to its final destination, whether that be on the other side of the city or country. So why is it that the Maersk Essex had to wait 17 days just to unload its cargo? What part of this system is broken? Well, in short, all of it. There's no one factor contributing to the Asia to North America supply chain slowdown, but rather the system is just overloaded. Most indicators suggest that trans-Pacific shipping demand is up about 25% compared to the pre-pandemic baseline, which isn't a massive increase, but it's sort of like congestion on the highway. Traffic is an exponential problem. When one lane is closed on a busy 4-lane highway, your journey takes more than 25% longer. Stopping and starting takes time that adds up and slows the overall flow down exponentially. This is why ramp meters work. They prevent excess traffic from entering a highway, keeping it at capacity and flowing freely, so even if it takes longer to get on the highway, each person's overall journey time is less. It's the same situation with ocean shipping. It's a system with a capacity, so when it's overloaded by 25%, the slowdown is more than 25%. Once a container is offloaded, it's placed into a sprawling terminal filled to the brim. With an increase in traffic, more trucks than usual are waiting in line to get through the terminal gates to pick up their cargo, which means picking up a container takes longer, which means a truck can't get back to the terminal as quickly, which means there are fewer trucks available to pick up containers, which means more and more containers stack up in the terminal. With containers leaving the port less quickly, there's less space for new containers, which means it takes longer to unload ships, which means ships are having to wait longer to get into the port, which means there's less shipping capacity since journey times are longer and ships can't get back to Asia to pick up a new load as quickly. Meanwhile, all the congestion means that terminal operators are restricting or prohibiting shippers from sending empty containers back to Asia, which means that shippers in Asia are struggling to find containers to use, which means that they're having to buy new containers, which pushes up their shipping costs. And then all this supply chain chaos means that shippers are sending goods earlier, which increases demand, which furthers the supply chain disruption. It's not so much a vicious cycle as a vicious web. Chaos compounding chaos. This is what happens when disruption hits an industry designed to be extraordinarily standardized, a system so reliant on economies of scale that the world's largest economy has to rely on 5 interface points with the world's largest manufacturing hub. It's a perfect system, a system responsible for many of the revolutions of the last century, but systems reliant on perfection are those most vulnerable to disruption. For now, though, the cogs keep turning. The Maersk Essex is out there, somewhere between California and Vietnam, shuttling another load of containers from continent to continent. Probably the most common question I receive is the most obvious one. How do we make these videos? I've finally gotten around to answering that by making a video following the process of making this video from start to finish. However, I don't really have a natural place to put that on YouTube, so like all the companion videos we make, it's on Nebula. That's because Nebula is the creator-founded and run streaming service with no algorithm, no ads, just the very best stuff us creators can make, whether it be these quick companion videos, long-form big-budget Nebula originals, or our regular videos early and ad-free. Of course, we want as many people to watch this stuff as possible, so we've partnered with CuriosityStream to make signing up super affordable. It's less than $15 for an entire year, but signing up there means you also get access to CuriosityStream 2, where you can watch their huge catalog of top-notch nonfiction shows and documentaries, like this episode of Engineering the Future, about how the future of cargo ships might actually be a technology of the past: wind power. So, 2 streaming services you'll actually watch for a year for the price you pay for a month of other services. That should already be convincing enough, but if not, signing up actually helps make sure that not only Wendover, but loads of independent creators are able to keep creating independently with the stable income Nebula provides. So, to get this deal and watch that exclusive behind-the-scenes video, click the button on screen or head to curiositystream.com/Wendover today.